My name is Elena and I am 55 years old. I had just been kicked out of my own son's wedding before a single photograph could be taken. He walked past me like a stranger, whispered something to his new wife, and the next morning he arrived at my door demanding property papers as if I owed him my entire life. I stood in the doorway with my travel bag still unpacked, makeup streaked, and a silence growing inside me that felt like a weapon. Nobody understood how much I had already survived, or how much I still had left to lose. And they certainly did not know what I was about to do next. Before I continue, tell me your country and the time right now. I used to think every family had a place for every child. A seat at the table. A voice. A face that was remembered and loved. I didn't understand, until much later, that my place had been assigned before I was even born. I was the one who worked. The one who served. The one who learned to be silent. When I was growing up, my parents adored my brothers. They were loud, spoiled, messy, and constantly in trouble, yet they were celebrated like kings. I learned early that applause in that house was not earned, it was inherited. My mother once told me, almost casually, boys are legacy. Girls are duty. There was no anger in her voice, just the tired logic of tradition. I became duty. I washed dishes at 7. Cooked at 8. Ironed school uniforms at 9. I never complained, because complaining was wasted breath. My brothers were allowed to be children. I was not. Even now, when I think of them laughing in the backyard while I scrubbed floors, I feel a sting low in my stomach. It was not jealousy. It was something colder. Something like erasure. When I turned 18, marriage became the escape they offered me. At least someone will take you, my mother said while adjusting my veil. My father didn't look at me. He just signed the last check for the wedding and left the room. I remember thinking, is this how someone begins a life? Unseen? My husband, Daniel, was not cruel at first. He was indifferent. That was worse in many ways. Indifference teaches you how to disappear. I tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect partner, the perfect everything, until perfection cracked and revealed exhaustion. Then I became pregnant, and everything changed for me. Not for him. My son, Matthew, was born with tiny hands and dark hair, and when I held him, something fierce woke up inside me. A flame that had been smothered for years. I carried him everywhere. I fed him, I bathed him, I whispered stories into his ear when Daniel didn't return home at night. I thought love could build something strong between us. I did not realize others were building something else. My mother visited often in those early years. She adored Matthew. My brothers adored Matthew. But they treated me like the invisible container he came from. Compliments were shaped like insults. He's perfect. Nothing like you. He must take after his father. You're lucky he doesn't see your faults. I learned not to argue. Silence became safety. As Matthew grew, he learned to mimic what he heard. Children absorb cruelty like air. One day, when he was 12, he looked at me and said, almost casually, "Why do you always embarrass me?" It was such a small sentence. But it tore something inside me. I had never embarrassed him. I barely existed in public. I was careful, quiet, invisible. Yet he had already learned how to blame me, without reason, without question. He had learned from them. His teenage years became a study in distance. He went everywhere with his father or his grandparents. I paid for his school, his clothes, his meals, but my name was never spoken in his gratitude. When he needed a signature, he called me. When he needed money, he came to me. When he needed love, he went to others. I told myself he would grow out of it. I clung to that belief like a tattered rope over a deep pit. When he announced his engagement, I was thrilled. I bought a dress. I dyed my hair. I practiced smiling in the mirror because I wanted that day to be bright. I told myself this was the moment everything would change, that motherhood would finally be acknowledged, that I would finally be seen. The wedding was held at a grand hall, with white silk drapes and long tables dripping with flowers. Cars lined the driveway. Guests walked in wearing perfume and pride. I stood outside the entrance, clutching my invitation. I could hear laughter and music inside. My heart beat so fast it felt like a drum inside my chest. I took one step toward the doors. Then I saw something that made my breath stop. At the entrance stood a young woman in a lavender dress, her smile rehearsed and her eyes scanning a list. When she looked up at me, the warmth on her lips vanished. "Name?" she asked, as though she didn't already know. "Elena," I said softly. "Mother of the groom." Her posture shifted. There was a small pause, the kind of pause that signals a message has been received. She turned slightly, whispered to someone inside, then looked back at me. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The guest list is full. There must be a misunderstanding." I stared at her, confused. "Full? That's impossible. My son sent me this." I held up the ivory invitation with shaking fingers, the embossed lettering catching the light. "Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Carter invite you to celebrate the wedding of their son, Matthew Carter, to Emily Lane." She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Mrs. Carter," she said, stressing the name, "I've been instructed not to let anyone in without authorization." I blinked. "Authorization?" She tilted her head as if I were a child asking too many questions. "Yes. Directly from the groom." Something in my chest shifted, not broke, just shifted, like the slow crack in ice before it gives way. I looked past her, through the glass doors, and saw them, Daniel, my ex-husband, laughing near the bar, Matthew, my son, standing beside his bride, his hand around her waist. They looked radiant, two people beginning their life together. My life was nowhere in that picture. I took a step forward. The bridesmaid raised her arms slightly, almost apologetically. "I can't let you in." "I'm his mother," I whispered. "Please, just tell him I'm here." She turned again to someone inside, murmured, then returned with eyes colder now. "He said no." My breath left my body. The music swelled behind her, a love song. Applause followed. A cheer. My throat tightened until it hurt to swallow. "No?" I repeated. He said no?" She nodded, expression flat, as though delivering a routine instruction. "He said it would cause a scene." A scene. After everything I'd endured, I was now an inconvenience at my own son's wedding. My eyes stung. I looked down to hide them, pretending to adjust my purse so she wouldn't see me crumble. I wanted to scream, but my voice betrayed me. I turned slowly, trying to hold myself upright as guests passed by without recognition. Every perfume, every laugh felt like a needle. I reached the edge of the parking lot before I dared look back, just once, at the glowing hall that held everything I had raised, everything I had lost. A flash of movement caught my eye. Matthew stepped outside for a moment, his hand still holding a champagne glass. He saw me. Our eyes met across the distance. For one heartbeat, I thought he might come. He didn't. He leaned toward Emily, whispered something, and she smiled, that polite, cruel smile people use when they're above you. Then he turned his back. I don't remember how long I stood there. I only remember the sound of my heels clicking on the pavement as I walked away, the invitation still clutched in my hand like proof that I once existed in his life. That night, I lay on my bed fully dressed, mascara streaking down my cheeks, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed with wedding photos from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Captions filled with joy and congratulations. No one noticed my absence. Not one message asked where I was. By midnight, I turned off the phone. In the darkness, I whispered to no one, maybe tomorrow he'll realize what he's done. The thought carried me into uneasy sleep. The morning light brought no apology, only a sound that rattled the walls. 3 sharp knocks at my door. Firm. Demanding. When I opened it, my son stood there with a folder in his hand. He looked different in daylight. Not like the boy who once held my hand while crossing streets or the teenager who used to sleep in late on Sundays. He looked older, taller, colder, and yet somehow smaller. His suit jacket from the night before was still creased, his eyes bloodshot, but his voice carried the authority of someone rehearsed. "Mom," he said. No warmth. No hesitation. Just the word, mechanical. I stepped aside, expecting him to walk in, but he didn't. He stood on the threshold as though my house had become contaminated ground. Behind him, a sleek black car idled, his new wife sitting inside. I caught her profile in the window reflection, sunglasses, phone in hand, no interest in looking at me. "I need the property papers," he said flatly. "Dad said they're still in your name. The house, the land, everything. We're sorting finances now." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "What?" He sighed, as if tired of explaining. "The house, Mom. It's technically yours, but it should be transferred. It's part of the family estate. We're reorganizing everything." My throat tightened. "Reorganizing? You mean taking it away from me?" His jaw clenched. "Don't make it dramatic." I laughed then, a dry, hollow laugh that surprised even me. "Dramatic? Matthew, you threw me out of your wedding. You humiliated me in front of strangers. And now you come here asking for—" "Not asking," he cut in. "I'm telling you. It'll make things easier." I felt my pulse in my ears. The room tilted slightly. "Easier for whom?" He shifted the folder in his hands, impatience sharpening his tone. "For everyone. Dad said you'd understand if you calmed down. You don't need this place, Mom. You can move somewhere smaller. You're alone now. Think about it logically. Alone." He said it like a fact. Like a punishment. I looked around the small living room, the couch with faded fabric, the wall clock that had stopped years ago, the framed photo of him as a child. Everything in this house was built by my hands. Every tile paid for with my overtime wages, every coat of paint brushed by me. I worked double shifts for that roof. And now he stood there, asking for the deed as though I were a guest. "Matthew," I whispered. "Why are you doing this?" He sighed again. "Mom, please. Don't make this harder. Just sign the transfer. We're finalizing with the lawyer tomorrow." I stepped back, shaking my head. "What lawyer? Who gave you the right?" He raised his voice then, sharp enough to slice the air. "Dad did. It's not your place to question that." The sound silenced the birds outside. My hands trembled. "After everything I've done for you," I said softly. "After every bill I paid, every night I stayed up worrying." He cut me off again, louder now. "Stop living in the past. You're acting like a victim. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing." The word landed harder than any slap. I could feel my eyes burning, but I refused to let him see the tears. Instead, I turned toward the old cabinet near the hallway, the one where I kept my documents. My fingers grazed the handle. For a second, I imagined pulling out the papers, handing them to him, ending this pain quickly. But something inside me, a faint echo of strength I'd buried long ago, stopped me. I turned back to face him. "No," I said quietly. His expression hardened. "What?" I said no. He stared at me as though he'd never heard that word before. Then he laughed, short, mocking. "You're being unreasonable. Emily's waiting in the car. I don't have time for—" "Then go," I said. He blinked. "What? Go. You came here for my house, not for me. So take your arrogance and your new wife and go." His mouth tightened. He looked ready to say something cruel, but for once, he didn't. He turned, muttering something under his breath, and walked back to the car. The engine started. The tires sprayed gravel as they pulled away. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding, the echo of the doorframe humming beneath my fingers. For a moment, the silence was almost comforting, until I noticed the folder he had dropped on the floor. I bent down slowly and picked it up. Inside were printed legal forms, property diagrams, and a letterhead from a law firm I'd never heard of. My name was written at the top, underlined. Something wasn't right. As I turned the last page, I noticed a signature line already filled, in my handwriting. But I had never signed it. A chill ran through me. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the signature that wasn't mine. My handwriting, perfectly forged, the loops and slants copied with unsettling precision. The date scrawled beneath it was from a week ago, when I had been home alone, nursing a cold, too weak to even step outside. The realization struck like a storm. They had planned this long before the wedding. The humiliation, the expulsion, it was never just emotional punishment. It was strategy. A knock startled me again. Softer this time, hesitant. I half expected it to be Matthew, ashamed, ready to apologize. When I opened the door, both he and Emily stood there, smiling faintly as though nothing had happened. "Morning, Mom," he said smoothly. "I think you dropped that folder." He knew exactly what I'd seen. I stepped back but didn't invite them in. "Why is my signature on these documents?" Emily spoke first, voice sugar-coated. "Oh, that's just a draft. You must have signed earlier and forgotten. Don't worry, the lawyer will handle the rest." "I forgot?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Are you out of your mind?" Matthew's face darkened. "Stop being dramatic. You're not the victim here. We're just trying to secure the family's future. You've been living here rent-free for decades." "Rent-free?" I gasped. "This house was bought with my salary, my savings." "Technically, Mom," Emily interrupted, her tone sharpening, "the initial deposit came from your father, right? That makes it part of the Carter estate. So legally." "Legally?" I snapped. "You don't know a thing about legality. You weren't even born when this house was bought." Matthew stepped closer. "Mom, please, just sign it. We're not asking for much." I said no. The silence that followed was dense, electric. His jaw twitched, his composure cracking. Then he said it, slowly, deliberately, "Dad warned me you'd pull this." Something inside me froze. "Warned you?" He smirked. "Yeah. He said you'd pretend to be noble, to hold everything hostage out of spite. That's what you do, right? Play the victim?" My hand trembled as I pointed toward the door. "Get out." He didn't move. "Mom." I said, "Get out." My voice rose, stronger this time, surprising even me. "Before I call the police." For a brief second, the boy I once knew flickered behind his eyes, confused, hurt, but it vanished under the weight of arrogance. He turned sharply and walked out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Emily lingered just long enough to whisper, "You'll regret this." When the car pulled away again, the silence left behind was deafening. I sank onto the couch, head in my hands. My body trembled with fury and disbelief. How could he do this? How could they? Every corner of the house felt like a witness to my humiliation. The photographs on the shelf stared back at me, Matthew's first day of school, his graduation, his 18th birthday. All smiling. All lies. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt. Hours passed. The sun moved across the window, and I hadn't moved. My phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. Just 2 words. "Sign it." No greeting, no explanation. Just an order. The final illusion shattered then. There was no misunderstanding, no emotional impulse. This was orchestrated, by the man who had abandoned me years ago, now returning to strip away what little I had left. I pressed my palms together, forcing myself to breathe. For a moment, I wanted to give up, to end the argument, to sign and disappear quietly. But as I stared at that folder again, I noticed something small but strange, a faint smudge of blue ink, not from a pen but a stamp. A legal seal. And beneath it, in faded print, the name of a law firm, Harris and Bloom Attorneys. Something about it tugged at my memory. My father's lawyer had belonged to that same firm decades ago, back when he drafted the family trust. My pulse quickened. If my father's documents were ever handled by this firm, then somewhere, someone had records. Maybe even proof that this house wasn't part of the Carter estate at all. I wiped my face and straightened up. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it, something else had begun to stir, something sharp and deliberate. The next morning, I decided I wouldn't beg anymore. But before I could make that call, there came another knock on the door, louder, more impatient. I opened it, expecting another insult. Instead, it was a courier. He handed me an envelope stamped with the words Notice of Property Review, Carter Estate. Inside was a letter. A formal warning. They were taking me to court. I unfolded the letter with shaking hands. The official seal shimmered faintly in the morning light. Notice of Property Review, Carter Estate. The words bled into my vision, twisting into something unreal. I read every line 3 times, but my brain refused to accept it. They had filed a petition for transfer of ownership. They claimed I was mentally unfit to manage estate assets. They accused me of fraudulent possession of property that was legally allocated to the Carter lineage. Fraudulent possession. Mentally unfit. They were painting me as unstable, the bitter, delusional ex-wife clinging to what wasn't hers. It wasn't enough that my son had humiliated me, now he wanted to erase my sanity. My first instinct was to call him, to demand an explanation, but I stopped halfway. The image of his smirk from yesterday froze me in place. He would only twist my words, record them, use them as evidence. I knew how this game was played. Daniel had taught me long ago, manipulation disguised as logic. I sat in the quiet kitchen, the clock ticking like a countdown. The letter trembled in my grip. I thought of all the people who would believe them, relatives, neighbors, friends of friends. They would whisper, she lost it after the divorce. Poor thing, clinging to that old house. No wonder her son cut her off. And they would never know the truth. I folded the notice carefully and placed it beside the forged papers. My entire life reduced to a stack of lies. By afternoon, I forced myself to walk into town. The air felt too bright, too full of normal life, children laughing, a man selling flowers, someone playing music from a cafe window. The world went on, unaware that mine had just imploded. At the grocery store, I bumped into my cousin Claire, the only family member who had ever shown me occasional kindness. Her smile faltered when she saw my face. Elena? You look pale. What's wrong? I opened my mouth, but no sound came. I wanted to tell her everything, about the wedding, the forged documents, the court notice, but something stopped me. I saw the pity already forming in her eyes, the hesitation. Pity was just another form of disbelief. So I forced a weak smile. Just tired. She nodded too quickly. I heard about the situation with Matthew. He's under a lot of pressure, you know. Starting a new family, debts, expectations. Her words blurred after that. Debts. Pressure. Excuses. The same recycled lines people always use to justify cruelty. When I got home, the house felt heavier, darker. I placed the groceries on the counter and stared at the peeling wallpaper. I had no one left to talk to, no one who would listen without judgment. Even my friends from church had grown distant since the divorce. Daniel was charming, he knew how to make people take his side. I sat down on the floor, papers scattered around me like debris after a storm. My chest hurt, that slow, suffocating ache of betrayal that doesn't make you cry immediately, it just drains you. I don't remember falling asleep. When I woke, it was evening. The light outside was golden, the kind that makes everything look deceptively peaceful. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something, maybe instinct, made me answer. Mrs. Carter, a male voice said, formal, steady. "This is Andrew Harris from Harris and Bloom. We received notice that your property has been listed for transfer. I just wanted to confirm, did you authorize that?" My breath caught. "No," I whispered. "Absolutely not." A pause. Paper rustled on the other end. "That's what I thought. I remember your father's file. He established a trust deed decades ago, one that might override any current claim. Are you aware of that?" The room seemed to shrink around me. "No," I said slowly. "No one ever told me." "Then I suggest you come by tomorrow morning," he said. "This situation might be more complex than you think." After he hung up, I sat there in silence, staring at my reflection in the window. My face looked older, sharper, almost unfamiliar. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of something other than grief stirred in me. Not hope, not yet, but curiosity. A dangerous kind of curiosity. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about my father, about the locked cabinet he used to guard in his study. I remembered being a little girl, standing in the hallway as he whispered to his lawyer. My mother had called it men's business. But now I wondered if it had always been mine. At dawn, I made a cup of coffee and looked around my small, cluttered kitchen. The air felt different. I realized I had spent my whole life defending people who would never defend me. By noon, I decided I wouldn't defend anymore. Tomorrow, I would go to the lawyer's office. Tomorrow, I would find out what my father had hidden. But for now, the house was silent, until, once again, someone knocked. Slow, deliberate. 3 times. I froze, the letter still in my hand. When I opened the door, there was no one there. Just a brown envelope on the step, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "You don't know what you're sitting on." The handwriting was unfamiliar, clean, slanted, deliberate. The words swam in my vision, "You don't know what you're sitting on." For a long moment I just stood there, the paper trembling between my fingers, feeling the air change around me. I looked up and down the street, nothing. No car pulling away, no figure turning the corner. Only the faint hum of cicadas and the late sun sinking behind the trees. Someone knew something. Someone who wanted me warned, but not safe. The sentence wasn't kindness. It was caution. I locked the door and sat at the kitchen table again. My pulse was wild. My first thought was that Daniel had sent it, his kind of psychological warfare, designed to keep me unsteady before court. But the phrasing wasn't his, he liked threats wrapped in charm. This note was plain. Cold. Like a fact. I pulled out the old envelope from the attic, my father's handwriting on the front, the one I had found years ago but never opened because I thought it was just a set of receipts. I spread the contents across the table, brittle deeds, yellowed letters, a faded business card with embossed letters that read Harris and Bloom, Legal Trust Division. The same name from the phone call. It wasn't coincidence. I stayed awake all night reading those papers by the weak glow of a lamp. Among the stacks was a document titled Private Family Trust Agreement, 1988. It stated that all properties purchased under my father's name after a certain date would be non-transferable without the direct consent of the designated heir. And the designated heir's name, written in my father's stiff handwriting, was mine. Elena Carter. My hands went cold. For years, I had believed my father died without leaving anything to me. My brothers had said he left the business to them, the land to my mother, and nothing of note to me. I hadn't even questioned it, I was too used to being overlooked. But here it was, proof, his signature, notarized, sealed. I should have felt joy. Vindication. Something triumphant. Instead, I felt grief all over again, grief for the girl who never knew she mattered. My phone buzzed. A message from Matthew. "Mom, you're making things worse. Just sign before it gets ugly." I stared at the screen. The boy I once carried through fevers, who once pressed his little hand to my cheek and called me the best mom, now texted me like a stranger negotiating a deal. I typed a single word back. No. Then I turned off the phone. When morning came, I dressed carefully, navy skirt, white blouse, small silver pendant my father gave me when I was 16. It felt right, like armor. The law office was in the old part of town, tucked between a bookstore and a florist. The brass plaque gleamed faintly, Harris and Bloom, Estates and Trusts. Inside, the scent of old paper and lemon polish. The receptionist looked up politely. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," I said. "With Andrew Harris." A moment later, he appeared, tall, graying, eyes kind but sharp. "Mrs. Carter," he said, extending a hand. "I'm glad you called." He led me to a quiet office lined with mahogany shelves. Files towered behind him like silent witnesses. "I looked through our archives last night," he began. "Your father's trust file was sealed for decades. You're the legal heir, Mrs. Carter. Not your ex-husband, not your son. You. Everything registered under your father's post-1988 acquisitions, including this house, is protected by that trust." I stared at him, unable to speak. "Protected, meaning?" "Meaning," he said carefully, "no one can force you to transfer, sell, or surrender those assets without your consent. If anyone tried to forge your signature or file claims, they've already committed fraud." I felt the breath leave my chest. "My son, my husband, they filed against me." He nodded grimly. "Then we'll need to document everything. I'll request certified copies from the deed office and file a protective claim under your name. It's the only way to stop them before the review hearing." I nodded numbly. My fingers curled into fists in my lap. For the first time in weeks, my tears weren't of weakness, they were release. "Why didn't anyone tell me this before?" I whispered. "Your father was cautious," Harris said softly. "He suspected your family might manipulate you. He left specific instructions for us to contact you only if your ownership was challenged." "So he knew," I murmured. "He knew they'd come for me." Harris slid a small, sealed envelope across the desk. "He left this, too. Said it would make sense when the time was right." I held it with trembling hands, unable to open it yet. Outside, the city buzzed, unaware that the woman sitting in that quiet office had just discovered a sleeping weapon buried in her name. When I finally stepped back into the daylight, the sky looked sharper, brighter. I felt something in my spine straighten, the faint but undeniable return of power. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but I knew this: they thought I was broken. They thought I'd surrender quietly. They had no idea who they had created. As I turned the corner, my phone buzzed again, a new message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Elena. You'll regret it." I didn't sleep that night. The warning message replayed in my head until dawn: "Stop digging, Elena. You'll regret it." It had no sender's name, no traceable number, just an empty threat floating in the dark like smoke. But I had lived long enough to know that threats only come when someone is afraid. When the first light touched the window, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the sealed envelope Andrew Harris had handed me. My father's handwriting was still neat, deliberate. The wax seal cracked easily beneath my thumb. Inside, one page. A single sentence, written in his hand. "If they ever come for you, remember, you don't owe them forgiveness, only truth." No preamble. No affection. Just that cold, steady line, his way of telling me he had seen the storm before I did. My father was not a tender man, but he was a shrewd one. Now, years after his death, I finally understood what he'd built, not just a trust fund, but a fortress. By mid-morning, I was back in Harris's office. He looked tired but composed, surrounded by files that looked as old as my memories. "I've reviewed your father's trust," he said, tapping a page with his pen. "It's airtight. He placed ownership of several properties under your name, along with shares in his company, Westvale Holdings. It seems your brothers concealed this information after his death." I swallowed hard. "You mean they knew?" "Yes. And they likely conspired with your ex-husband to keep you unaware. A laugh escaped me, bitter, humorless. Of course they did. That's what my family does, smile while stealing. He nodded grimly. We'll begin filing immediate injunctions to stop any property transfers or legal claims. Once the papers are submitted, no one can touch your assets without facing criminal charges. Criminal, I repeated. The word rolled off my tongue like thunder. Good. Harris looked at me carefully. Mrs. Carter, this will cause noise. They won't take it quietly. I don't want them quiet, I said. I want them exposed. He studied me a moment longer before sliding a folder across the desk. These are your father's company records. You might want to see something. Inside were old photographs, my father shaking hands with board members, a younger version of him in front of a warehouse, and one image that made me freeze, Daniel, my ex-husband, standing beside him. When was this taken? I asked. Roughly 25 years ago, Harris said. Before your marriage, he worked under your father as a logistics clerk. Your father let him go due to embezzlement suspicions. My breath caught. He never told me that. He wouldn't. And your father didn't want to humiliate you by revealing it. He assumed Daniel would never have access to your inheritance, since it was under trust. My vision blurred for a moment, fury mixing with nausea. So that's what this was. Not a family dispute, a second act of an old theft. Daniel had been waiting for decades to finish what he started. I want every record, I said quietly. Every transaction, every file, every message between them. Harris hesitated. Are you planning to confront them? Not yet, I said. They'll tell on themselves if I give them time. He gave a faint smile. Your father said something similar about your mother once. The rest of the day passed in a haze of scanning, signing, and sorting. Harris's assistant printed documents while I reread the trust's clauses again and again. Each one felt like armor I hadn't known I possessed. When I finally left, dusk had begun to fall. The city lights shimmered in the distance. My phone buzzed again, another message from Matthew. Dad says we can still fix this. Just sign the paperwork. I'll visit tomorrow. There was no apology, no warmth. Just command disguised as mercy. I typed back. Come tomorrow if you must. Bring your lawyer. I didn't send it immediately. I stared at the blinking cursor for a full minute, then deleted the last words. I wanted him to walk in blind. That night, I wandered through my house, tracing my fingers along the old furniture, the cracks in the wall, the faded photographs. Everything looked different now, sharper, like the outlines of a battlefield. For years, I had been the woman who kept her head down, who apologized first, who swallowed insults just to keep peace. But peace built on silence is just surrender in disguise. I opened my father's envelope again, read his sentence once more, and whispered it aloud, you don't owe them forgiveness, only truth. It felt like a vow. When morning came, I was ready. I brewed strong coffee, placed all the forged documents in a folder, and left them on the kitchen table. The doorbell rang at 9 sharp. Through the glass, I saw Matthew and Daniel standing side by side. Daniel's smile was the same as always, charming, controlled, poisonous. Matthew looked tense, eyes darting. I opened the door and let them in without a word. Daniel spoke first. Elena, we're here to resolve this peacefully. I nodded toward the table. Then sit. He laughed lightly. Still dramatic as ever. I didn't respond. I slid the forged documents toward them. Do these look familiar? Matthew frowned. Why? Because I had them authenticated yesterday, I said softly. They're fake. Whoever copied my signature did a decent job, but they missed one thing. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder stamped with Harris and Bloom's insignia. Daniel's color drained the moment he saw it. What's that? Matthew asked. Proof, I said. That this house, And everything my father owned belongs to me. Silence. Daniel's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. I smiled for the first time in years. Then take me to court and find out. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Matthew's expression flickered between confusion and fear. I stood up slowly, letting the weight of my calm settle over the room. Next time you show up here, I said, bring your lawyer. Mine's already waiting. They left without another word. When the door shut behind them, I exhaled, shaky, trembling, but steady inside. I didn't know it yet, but that morning had marked the shift. The beginning of their downfall. The air felt strangely clean after they left, like the house itself had exhaled. I stood at the window watching them walk down the driveway, Daniel rigid, Matthew tense, both pretending not to argue. I could see Daniel's hand cutting the air sharply, his voice raised even though I couldn't hear it. Matthew didn't look back once. I closed the curtains and leaned against the wall, my heart racing. The adrenaline was new, unfamiliar. I had spent years trembling before their temper, shrinking in silence. Now, for the first time, I felt a thrill of power humming beneath my skin. It was intoxicating and terrifying. I brewed another cup of coffee and sat with the folder Harris had given me. Inside were copies of the trust documents, the transfer certificates, and something else, a USB drive. He had said, you might want to see this privately. I inserted it into my old laptop. A folder opened. Inside, audio files. Dozens of them, each labeled with a date. The earliest was from 1987. My father's voice came through, firm, recorded during meetings. But the later ones were different. Fainter, domestic. Conversations at home. And one of them stopped my breath entirely. Date, June 1999, Carter Estate. I pressed play. The crackling static gave way to familiar voices. My father's, older, weaker. My mother's, sharp and scolding. And another voice, Daniel's. Father, she doesn't know yet, does she? Daniel, no, sir. Elena thinks everything goes to you and the boys. Father, keep it that way. Until I'm gone, they'll try to ruin her. Daniel, I understand. Father, do you? She's the only one who worked for any of this. I made sure the trust secures her. But if you ever touch it, if you ever lie to her, this office will destroy you. Silence. Daniel, of course, sir. The recording ended there. I froze, hands trembling, coffee forgotten. He'd known. My father had seen everything before it happened. He had warned Daniel in his final months, and Daniel had smiled, nodded, and still gone on to do it anyway. I sat in the stillness, feeling the betrayal crawl beneath my skin. Every argument, every cold glance, every manipulation now made sense. Daniel had married me not for love, but for access, to my father's wealth, to security. And when my father died, and the truth stayed buried, Daniel built his empire on the illusion that I owned nothing. But the illusion was cracking now. I called Harris immediately. I found recordings, I said. My voice was shaking, but steady enough. My father had proof of Daniel's deceit. Send them, he replied at once. This changes everything. I copied the files and emailed them to him. Within an hour, he called back. Elena, this isn't just a will dispute anymore, he said. This is evidence of premeditated fraud. We can subpoena Daniel and Matthew for attempting to falsify ownership documents. But we must move fast before they destroy their own records. What do I do? For now? Stay silent. Let them think you're scared. They'll get careless. So I did. For 3 days, I played the role they had written for me all my life, the weak, trembling woman in denial. I ignored Matthew's calls, didn't answer Daniel's texts. Rumors began to spread among relatives. My cousin messaged me. Everyone's saying you're suing your own son. Please tell me it's not true. I didn't respond. Let them talk. Let the whispers build. Truth needed silence to grow teeth. By the fourth day, Harris called again. The court has accepted the preliminary injunction, he said. They can't sell, transfer, or claim any asset under your name. But I think you should hear something else. He sent me another file, an audio clip from an anonymous source. I hesitated before pressing play. Then Daniel's voice filled the room again, low and vicious. She won't fight. She's weak. Once we push her into a medical evaluation, the lawyer will declare her unfit. I'll have control in a week. My knees went weak. I sat down hard. So that was the plan, to destroy my sanity legally. The kind of violence that doesn't leave bruises, just paperwork. I closed my eyes, breathing slow. What happens if I win? I asked Harris. He paused. You'll inherit everything your father intended. Property, shares, liquid assets, several million, at least. Millions. It didn't even feel real. I'd been counting grocery discounts for years. I don't care about the money, I said. I care that they lose everything they built on me. Harris's voice softened. Then we'll make that happen. Quietly, methodically. When I hung up, I sat for a long time staring at the old photo on my mantel, the one of Matthew as a child, missing his front teeth, holding a paper airplane I had made for him. For a brief second, grief slipped through my anger. I remembered his laughter, his small hands reaching for mine. Then I remembered his voice outside the wedding hall, she said no. I closed my eyes. The grief turned to fire. That night, I started organizing my own evidence. Messages, voicemails, bank receipts, all of it went into labeled envelopes. I even began recording every call, every conversation. I wasn't going to shout this time. I was going to document. Before I went to bed, I checked my phone one last time. A new voicemail waited. I played it on speaker. Elena, it's Emily. You don't understand what you're doing. If you keep pushing, everything will come out. Things you won't like. Think of Matthew. Think of your reputation. Her voice trembled at the end. Not guilt, fear. I smiled to myself in the dark. Good, I whispered. Be afraid. When I finally lay down, the house was silent except for the ticking clock. Tomorrow, I would meet Harris again. Tomorrow, I would start the next phase. I didn't know it yet, but the trap had already begun to close. The morning sky was gray, heavy with rain. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I left the house early, clutching a small folder to my chest, the one containing every piece of proof I'd gathered. My heart was calm now, unnervingly so. The tremors that used to run through my hands had disappeared. At the law office, Harris was already waiting. He stood by the window, tie loosened, eyes focused on a stack of files. When he turned to me, his expression was grave but steady. They've escalated, he said without preamble. Daniel's lawyers filed an emergency claim. They're accusing you of tampering with property records. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. Of course they are. They can't win with truth, so they build lies. Harris nodded. It's predictable. But we'll use that. Remember what I said, stay silent. Let them dig their own grave. He slid another envelope toward me. These are transcripts from your father's recorded meetings. One of them mentions a secondary trust, a contingency fund tied to Westvale Holdings. You have the authority to activate it. I frowned. Activate? He smiled faintly. Meaning, you can assume direct financial control of all your father's corporate shares. They think you're just fighting for your house. They have no idea you can take everything. The words hit me like a slow, electric wave. Everything. For decades, they treated me like a forgotten shadow, an accessory, not a person. Now, every asset they worshipped, every symbol of power they used to humiliate me, was legally mine. What do I have to do? I asked. Nothing publicly yet, he said. We'll file the transfer silently. Once it's finalized, they won't be able to touch a cent. But we'll need signatures, and you'll have to visit the bank in person. I'll do it. He studied me for a moment. You're calmer than I expected. I've cried enough, I said simply. He nodded once, then leaned forward. There's something else, Elena. Someone's been leaking information from their side. Anonymous emails with attachments, financial statements, messages, even phone logs. I think someone close to them wants you to win. My stomach tightened. Who? He hesitated. The sender uses a disposable account. But judging by the content, I'd say it's Emily. I sat back in shock. His wife? She's not stupid, Harris said. Your son's gambling debts are severe. She's realizing the man she married isn't who she thought. She's scared of sinking with him. I tried to process that. Emily, the woman who'd barred me from my son's wedding, was now secretly sending me evidence. The irony twisted through me like a knife. Harris opened a document on his laptop and turned it toward me. These are bank transfers from Matthew's account to a private offshore fund, managed under your name. He's been laundering money through your identity. That's felony-level fraud. My pulse quickened. He used my name? Yes. It's why they're so desperate for your signature. Without it, everything collapses. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring. My own son, using me as a shield for his crimes. My own blood, gambling away my name. A coldness spread through me, not rage, not grief, just final clarity. Then let it collapse, I said. Harris smiled faintly. That's what I wanted to hear. He handed me a small digital recorder. Keep this with you. Record everything from now on. Conversations, visits, calls. Especially when they think you're alone. Every word matters now. I nodded. Understood. When I left the office, the rain had started to fall. I didn't rush for cover. The cold drops hit my face like baptism. People hurried past me with umbrellas and briefcases, but I walked slow, unflinching. For years, I had run from confrontation. Now, I welcomed it. When I got home, the phone was already ringing. Matthew. I answered, my voice calm. Yes? Mom, he said, breathless. What the hell are you doing? Dad says you hired some lawyer to freeze our accounts. Not our accounts, I said evenly. Mine. He exhaled sharply. You can't do this. You'll ruin everything. Emily's freaking out. I let a small pause stretch between us. She should be. What's that supposed to mean? I think she already knows what you've done, I said quietly. There was silence on the line. Then his tone changed, fear masked by anger. Don't talk to her. Don't you dare talk to her. I almost smiled. Why not, Matthew? Afraid of what I might learn? He cursed under his breath. You've lost it. You're destroying your own family. No, I said. You destroyed it the moment you forged my name. He fell silent again. I could almost hear the tremor in his breathing. Then he hung up. I pressed stop on the recorder. Every word captured. Every threat preserved. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing a list. Evidence files. Witnesses. Statements. Hidden assets. Timelines. For every wound they had given me, I now had a piece of paper ready to cut back. Near midnight, I heard movement outside, a car idling too long, headlights dim. I peeked through the blinds. A figure sat in the driver's seat, unmoving. Watching. I grabbed my phone and filmed a short clip through the window, timestamp and all. Then I texted Harris. They're watching the house. He replied almost instantly. Good. Let them. They'll think you're scared. Just keep recording. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the rain, the steady hum of the car engine outside, the sound of my own heartbeat. For the first time in my life, fear and power felt exactly the same. Tomorrow, I would start my own kind of war. The next morning, I woke with a strange clarity, like my mind had been sharpened overnight. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't a chain anymore. It was fuel. I began documenting everything. Every phone call. Every knock on the door. Every slip of paper that arrived in my mailbox. My kitchen became a command center, folders stacked by color, notebooks filled with dates, a tape recorder that clicked on at every sound. I moved methodically, without emotion. That was the trick. Emotion had been my weakness for too long. They had fed on it, Daniel, my mother, my son. They mistook tears for surrender. But now my silence unnerved them. The first file I opened was the one Harris had labeled Carter Estate, Financial Movement. I studied each transaction, each false deposit, tracing the trail of deceit back to Matthew's gambling accounts. It felt almost surgical, the precision of the theft, the timing, the way my name appeared just often enough to make it look like my fault. Harris called mid-morning. "They're scrambling," he said. Daniel tried to withdraw from the joint business account, but the injunction froze it. I'd imagine panic is setting in. "Good," I said simply. He hesitated. "You sound different." "I am different." He chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that held a flicker of admiration. "I'll schedule the next meeting with the estate board. We'll need your signature on a few more forms. And Elena, keep every call recorded. Especially your son's. His temper will be our best witness." After we hung up, I scrolled through my phone and opened the voice memo app. The recordings played in sequence, his tone shifting from pleading to demanding, from insult to desperation. Each clip was a brick in the wall I was building. That afternoon, I went to the local notary's office to certify the recordings. The clerk looked surprised as I handed over the USB stick and affidavits. "That's a lot of documentation," he murmured. "I've waited my whole life to be heard," I said. He stamped the files without another word. When I stepped outside, the sky was overcast, wind whipping through the trees. I could smell rain on the way. Across the street, parked by the curb, was the same black car from the night before. Its tinted windows hid whoever sat inside, but I could feel the gaze on me. I didn't flinch this time. I walked straight to it, heels clicking on wet pavement, and knocked on the driver's window. A man in a dark suit rolled it down halfway. His face was unfamiliar, but his expression wasn't arrogant, detached, the kind of man who believed women like me were powerless. "Can I help you?" he asked, tone clipped. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "Private security. Just making sure everything's in order." "Sent by whom?" He didn't answer. "Tell Daniel," I said evenly, "that the next time he sends someone to intimidate me, I'll include it in the harassment report I'm filing. And tell my son, if he still has a conscience, to remember that I taught him to pray before he learned to lie." The man's smirk faltered. "I think you're mistaken." I leaned in close. "Do I look mistaken?" He didn't reply. When I stepped back, the window rolled up, and the car pulled away. By the time I returned home, my pulse had steadied again. I recorded a short note to Harris describing the encounter. Then, almost instinctively, I walked to the attic, the one place in the house untouched by all of this. It smelled of dust and old wood. Sunlight streamed through the small window in fractured lines. I began opening boxes, searching for something, anything, left of my father. I found photographs, a stack of ledgers, and finally, tucked inside a tin box, a small cassette tape labeled in my father's handwriting, "Final record." My breath caught. I carried it downstairs, found my old tape player, and pressed play. His voice filled the room, aged, deliberate, still commanding even through the static. "Elena, if you're hearing this, then you've seen what they're capable of. Don't waste your anger proving your worth to them. Use it to protect what's yours. There's a file with Mr. Harris, sealed until you request it. It contains every account they stole, every lie they built. When you open it, don't warn them. Let the truth do the work." My father's voice faded, and I sat there frozen, tears sliding silently down my cheeks. For years I had begged for his love. Now I realized he had given me something greater, his foresight, his armor. I wiped my eyes and looked around the house. Everything I had been ashamed of, the peeling paint, the worn furniture, suddenly felt sacred. A battlefield reclaimed. That night, Harris called again. "Elena, the media's starting to catch wind of the court petition. Daniel's people leaked part of it to the press." "Let them," I said. "They're expecting me to hide." "I won't." He hesitated. "Do you want me to issue a statement?" "No. Silence will say more." I spent that evening preparing my next move, labeling all evidence, copying it to 2 flash drives, locking one in my father's safe, and mailing the other to Harris's office. At midnight, I turned off every light and stood in the doorway, staring out into the dark garden. The wind moved through the trees, and the old swing Matthew once played on creaked faintly. My heart clenched, not from nostalgia, but from realization. Every memory of love I had ever offered them was now ammunition. They had taught me how to fight by showing me how it felt to lose. I whispered to the night, "You wanted a battle. You'll get one." The next morning, Harris called again, his tone sharper now. "They've just filed a harassment complaint against you. They're claiming you threatened them." I almost smiled. Perfect. That means they're scared. "Elena," he warned, "don't underestimate them. They'll twist this however they can. We'll need to show you acted only in self-defense." "I did," I said quietly. "And I have recordings to prove it." He paused, then said softly, "Good. Then let's start setting the trap." That night, I placed the recorder by my phone. The red light blinked softly. I knew Matthew would call again soon. Desperation always comes before collapse. And when he did, I'd be ready. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, the first drops of rain striking the roof like a drumbeat. It was beginning, the gathering before the storm. The storm arrived before dawn. Lightning cracked across the sky, thunder rumbling through the walls like a living thing. I sat awake at the kitchen table, coffee gone cold, the recorder blinking faintly beside me. I had spent the night rehearsing silence, what to say, what not to say. At exactly 7:12 a.m., the phone rang. His number. I let it buzz 4 times before answering. "Mom," Matthew's voice broke through, shaky, forced calm. "We need to talk." I pressed the speaker button and moved the recorder closer. "About what?" He exhaled loudly. "You've made this mess worse than it ever needed to be. The lawyer's furious, Dad's threatening to cut me off, and Emily," he stopped. "She's terrified, Mom. You're hurting people." I stared at the rain streaking down the window. "No, Matthew. I'm just done letting people hurt me." "Don't start with that martyr thing again," he snapped. "You think you're righteous, but all you're doing is ruining your own family name." "My name," I repeated. "You mean the one you used to hide stolen money?" Silence. Then a faint, nervous laugh. "You've been listening to lies. I have the bank records. The transfers. The signatures." His voice cracked. "Where did you get those?" "Does it matter?" I asked softly. "Truth doesn't need permission to exist." He cursed under his breath. "You think you can destroy Dad? He's connected. You don't know the kind of people he's working with." Then he should have chosen better company. "Mom, please," he said, his voice trembling now. "You don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. There are deals, contracts, people who won't hesitate to." He stopped himself, as though realizing he'd said too much. "To what?" I asked. "Just stop," he whispered. "Please. Sign whatever Dad sends. You'll get money. You can live comfortably." I closed my eyes. You already took everything that mattered. Comfort means nothing now. When he hung up, I saved the recording, labeled it Threat, 7:12 a.m. The storm outside was easing, but the one inside me had just begun. By mid-morning, Harris arrived at my house, rain still dripping from his coat. He carried a leather briefcase and an expression that meant trouble. "They're cornered," he said. "Daniel tried to move funds offshore last night. The transaction bounced because of the injunction. We intercepted the notice." I smiled faintly. "And Matthew?" "He's unraveling. Their lawyer called mine this morning, offering settlement negotiations." My eyebrows lifted. "Already?" "Yes. Which means they know the case is turning." I walked to the window, staring at the fading rain. "No settlement. I want them exposed, not forgiven." Harris nodded slowly. "I thought you'd say that." He pulled out a folder. "There's more. The anonymous source, Emily, sent another email last night. Encrypted, but we traced it to her workplace account. It includes voice messages between her and Daniel. He's threatening her too." I turned sharply. "Threatening her?" "Yes. She's terrified. She's documenting everything. I think she's realized she married a man with no limits." I felt a strange pang, not pity, exactly, but recognition. Emily was walking through the same maze I'd once wandered, charmed, deceived, trapped. "Is she safe?" I asked quietly. "For now," Harris said. "She's staying with a friend. She wants to meet you." "Meet me?" I frowned. "Why?" "She says she has something you need to see. Something that can finish this." The phrase settled in the air like static. "Finish this? When?" "Tomorrow morning. Neutral location, our office conference room. She'll bring the evidence directly." I nodded slowly. "I'll be there." Harris hesitated. "Elena, you need to be careful. If Daniel finds out she's turned, he'll panic. And men like him, when they panic, they get reckless." "I know," I said softly. "That's why we let them." He studied me a long moment. "You've changed," he said. I just stopped apologizing. After he left, I began preparing for tomorrow. Every document, every note, every recording, organized, labeled, secured in 2 briefcases. I felt like I was preparing for war, except this time, the battlefield was truth. By evening, the sky cleared. The sunset bled orange over the soaked streets. I sat by the window, the recorder still beside me, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. At 8:45 p.m., headlights flashed through the blinds. A car stopped outside, same black sedan, same tinted windows. I opened the door before they could knock. Daniel stood there, umbrella dripping, eyes dark and wild. "Elena," he said, voice low. "We need to talk." "About what? Forgery or fraud?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't play games. You think this little act will end well for you? You've got no idea who you're provoking." I felt the recorder in my pocket. "Then enlighten me." He smirked. "You think that lawyer of yours can protect you? You're just a pawn, Elena. Always were. That trust your father left, it's not what you think. You're being used." His words were venom, but I could hear the tremor underneath, the first fracture of fear. "You're right," I said calmly. "I am being used, by justice." He laughed harshly. "Justice? Don't make me laugh. You've always been weak. That's why I married you. Easy to control. But you forgot who made you who you are." I took one step forward. "No, Daniel." I remembered exactly who tried to erase me. "And now you're standing in front of her." He froze, eyes narrowing. Then, for a brief moment, he looked uncertain, like he no longer recognized the woman before him. You'll regret this, he said finally, voice dropping to a hiss. You don't know what's coming. I do, I said. Court. He glared at me for a long, trembling second before turning sharply and walking back to the car. The tire screeched as he sped away. I closed the door, pulled the recorder from my pocket, and saved the file. The red light blinked twice, sealing his threats into evidence. When I sat down, the silence felt different, charged, alive. The fear was gone completely now. In its place was something colder, stronger, resolve. I opened my father's old leather journal and wrote 3 lines. 1. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. meeting with Emily. 2. Deliver evidence to Harris. 3. Do not flinch. Then I closed it and whispered to the empty room, you wanted a quiet woman. You created your executioner. Outside, lightning flashed one last time over the horizon. Tomorrow would decide everything. The next morning smelled of damp earth and iron, the kind of morning that follows a night of storms. I dressed carefully, not for vanity but for war, black slacks, cream blouse, hair tied tight. My reflection in the mirror startled me. The woman staring back was no longer the trembling mother begging for scraps of affection. She looked precise. Calculated. Before leaving, I double-checked the contents of my briefcase, evidence copies, the forged documents, and the recorder. I slipped my father's pendant around my neck, it had become my armor. The law office lobby was quiet when I arrived. Emily was already there, sitting near the window. She looked smaller without her makeup and heels, her posture folded in on itself. But her eyes, those same sharp, assessing eyes that once dismissed me at the wedding, now trembled with something else. Fear. Maybe guilt. She stood as I entered. Mrs. Carter. Elena, I corrected softly. We're past formalities. Harris gestured for us to follow him into the conference room. Files were already spread across the long mahogany table. The air hummed with tension. Emily clutched a small envelope. He doesn't know I'm here, she began, voice unsteady. Daniel. He's been paranoid for weeks, checking my phone, tracking my cards. He thinks I don't see what he's doing, but I've been copying everything. Every email, every call. Her hand shook as she slid the envelope toward me. Inside were printed screenshots, bank records, and a USB drive. Harris leaned forward. What's on this? Recordings, she whispered. Of Daniel and Matthew. They talk about the forged signatures, the fake medical evaluation, and what they planned if she didn't comply. My stomach clenched. What did they plan? Her eyes met mine. To have you declared legally unstable. Daniel said he'd bribe a psychiatrist, get you committed for evaluation, then file for full control of the estate. He said once you were inside, nobody would question it. The words sank like stones. I felt my pulse slow, the kind of slow that comes before a storm. And Matthew agreed? Emily nodded. He didn't want to at first. But Daniel told him the debts were too deep. That it was the only way out. Harris swore under his breath. This is more than civil now. This is conspiracy to defraud and unlawful coercion. Emily's voice cracked. I didn't know how bad it was until last week. Daniel hit me when I refused to delete the recordings. He said if I betrayed him, he'd ruin me too. For a moment, the old Elena, the one who used to comfort everyone else, rose to the surface. I reached across the table and touched her hand. You did the right thing. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry for everything. The wedding. The way I treated you. I thought you were pathetic. I didn't see what they were doing to you. To all of us. I held her gaze. They built their power on that. Making women believe they're each other's enemies. Harris cleared his throat gently. We'll add her statement to the affidavit. But Elena, there's more. He connected the USB to his laptop. The room filled with the crackle of an audio file. Daniel, the lawyer won't find anything. I burned the old trust documents years ago. Matthew, what if she talks to Harris? Daniel, then we'll make her look delusional. Old, confused, paranoid. Judges eat that up. One tear and she'll sound insane. Matthew, and if she doesn't back down? Daniel, then we'll handle it another way. The silence that followed was unbearable. Emily covered her face with her hands. I stared at the speaker, feeling something inside me go perfectly still. Harris spoke first, his tone quiet but edged with fury. This is attempted witness tampering and mental defamation. We'll submit it to the court as supplemental evidence. I nodded, my voice calm. Good. Let them hear what monsters sound like. Emily looked at me then, like she was seeing me for the first time. You're not scared? I was, I said. For most of my life. Fear taught me obedience. But now it's teaching me strategy. Harris leaned back, tapping a pen thoughtfully. They'll sense something's wrong soon. We'll file quietly today, and I'll request a hearing within 48 hours. They'll receive notice by Friday. What do I do until then? He smiled faintly. Whatever you want. You've already won. When the meeting ended, Emily followed me to the elevator. Her hands twisted nervously. He'll come after me when he finds out. Then stay close to Harris, I said. And record everything. If he calls, don't answer unless it's on speaker. She nodded slowly. Thank you. For what? For not hating me. I smiled sadly. I don't have the energy to hate anymore. When I stepped out into the sunlight, the city felt different. People rushed by, cars honked, life carried on, but I walked slower, breathing deeply. For the first time in months, I felt control, not the kind handed to you, but the kind you take back piece by piece. That evening, as I returned home, the mailbox flag was up. Inside, a single envelope, unmarked. My pulse quickened as I tore it open. Inside was a printed photo, Emily sitting in the conference room that morning. Beneath it, typed in block letters. Rats get poisoned first. My stomach dropped. I looked up and scanned the street. The black car was gone, but in its place, across the road, a new one sat idle. Windows dark. Engine silent. Watching. I went inside, locked every door, and called Harris. He answered immediately. I expected this. They're lashing out. Stay calm. You're safe. I've already informed the police liaison for witness protection protocols. And Elena, don't respond. Silence terrifies them more than rage. I can handle fear, I said quietly. I know, he replied. That's what makes you dangerous now. After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room, clutching the pendant at my neck. The shadows flickered against the walls, and I thought of every version of myself that had lived here, the dutiful daughter, the invisible wife, the abandoned mother. Each one had died a little for the next to be born. Tonight, all of them were finally one. I whispered into the dark, to my father's memory, to the universe itself. I'm done being your victim. Then I opened my notebook and wrote my next step in careful letters. Tomorrow, court notice. The beginning of their end. The official court date came faster than expected. Thursday morning. 10 a.m. The notice arrived on thick cream paper, sealed with the crest of the county courthouse. The moment I touched it, I felt the weight of every sleepless night settle into my hands. It wasn't fear, it was finality. This was the point of no return. I woke before sunrise that day. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a train. I moved through my rooms like someone preparing for battle, coffee brewing, documents packed, recordings checked one last time. The briefcase clicked shut like a closing lock on the past. I dressed deliberately. The same pale blue dress I had bought for Matthew's wedding. The one I never got to wear. The one that still carried the tag when I found it hanging in the closet, untouched and forgotten. I removed the tag that morning. not out of vanity, but out of defiance. When I arrived at the courthouse, cameras flashed at the entrance. Reporters murmured names: Daniel's, mine, Carter estate hearing. The story had leaked wider than anyone expected. Mother sues son in inheritance fraud. They said it like a scandal, but I heard it as a headline of survival. Harris met me inside, his face taut with focus. "You're ready?" I nodded once. "Always." He smiled faintly. "Good. Remember, you don't have to speak unless the judge addresses you directly. The evidence will do the speaking." The courtroom was smaller than I imagined, no grand hall, no echoing marble, just beige walls and rows of wooden benches. But power doesn't need grandness, it only needs truth. Daniel sat at the defense table, polished as ever in his dark suit, jaw clenched, eyes burning holes through me. Beside him, Matthew. His tie crooked, his face pale. He looked less like my son and more like a frightened boy wearing borrowed armor. The sight of him pierced something deep, but I didn't let it show. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My pulse matched the sound of the gavel. Harris began with calm precision. He laid out every fact, timeline, document, transaction. He spoke of the forged signatures, the fraudulent bank activity, the trust clauses, the recordings. His voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. The truth was weight enough. Then he played the audio files. The first, Daniel's voice mocking my supposed weakness. The second, Matthew's voice agreeing to the forged papers. The third, Daniel threatening to have me committed. The courtroom air thickened with each word. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, her expression hardening. When the final clip ended, the silence was suffocating. Daniel's lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, these recordings are inadmissible. They were obtained without consent." "They were obtained in my client's own home," Harris interrupted. "A home she owns outright under a protected trust. That gives her full right to record any conversation made within her property." The judge's eyes flicked toward me. "Mrs. Carter, is that correct?" I rose slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." My voice didn't tremble. I didn't stutter. The calmness surprised even me. "I recorded them in my house because I was afraid no one would believe me otherwise." The judge studied me for a long moment. "And you're saying the signatures on these documents are not yours?" "They are not," I said. "But the betrayal is." A ripple moved through the courtroom, whispers, gasps. Daniel glared at me, his lips tightening into a venomous smile. Matthew couldn't meet my eyes. The judge nodded. "Continue, Mr. Harris." He resumed methodically, submitting the bank statements and Emily's affidavit. The moment her statement was read aloud, the one where she described Daniel's threats and Matthew's compliance, the defense table cracked. Daniel slammed his hand against the table, whispering something harsh to his lawyer. The judge rapped the gavel. "Control your client." Harris leaned toward me and whispered, "He's losing composure. Let him burn himself." Daniel's lawyer tried to recover. "Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding, not a criminal conspiracy. My clients were acting in good faith." "Good faith?" the judge cut in sharply. "Forged signatures? Fraudulent transfers? Coerced psychological evaluations? Explain to me where that qualifies as good faith." The lawyer's words faltered. Daniel's jaw twitched. Matthew looked like he wanted to disappear. Then Harris played the final recording, one Emily had delivered last minute that morning. Daniel's voice again, quieter this time, but clearer than ever. "Once the court rules her unfit, I'll liquidate the trust and transfer everything offshore. She'll never see a dime." The judge sat back slowly. "That's enough." Silence. A silence so profound it roared. "Mr. Carter," she said, addressing Daniel, "do you wish to respond?" He stood, smoothing his suit, feigning composure. "Your Honor, my wife is unstable. She's been manipulated by lawyers who want her money. Those recordings are edited." The judge raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Carter. He froze. She turned to Matthew. And you, Mr. Matthew Carter. Do you confirm these are your voice recordings? His voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. Daniel's head whipped toward him, fury blazing. What are you doing? He hissed. Matthew swallowed hard. Telling the truth. That single sentence cracked the room open. Daniel's face went red, his lawyer looked defeated. Harris kept his expression neutral, but I saw the flicker of triumph in his eyes. The judge tapped her pen thoughtfully. Given the presented evidence, this court hereby freezes all Carter estate accounts until final review. Mrs. Carter's ownership of the trust properties remains valid. All attempts to transfer, falsify, or intimidate will be considered obstruction and contempt. A wave of relief, so deep it almost hurt, swept through me. I didn't cry. I simply breathed. Daniel slammed his hand again. You can't do this. That money. The gavel struck once. Sit down, Mr. Carter, or I will hold you in contempt. He did. But his eyes burned with promises I'd already outlived. When the judge adjourned, reporters surged toward the aisle. Harris shielded me as we exited, whispering, that was just the first battle. The verdict comes next week. But today, we won. Outside, flashes erupted, voices shouted questions. Mrs. Carter, are you pressing criminal charges? Did your son apologize? What will you do with the inheritance now? I said nothing. Silence had become my weapon, and every camera caught it. As Harris guided me into the car, I looked back at the courthouse steps. Matthew stood there alone, head bowed, Daniel arguing with reporters. Rain began to fall again, soft and cold, washing the dust from the marble. I leaned back in my seat and whispered to myself, my turn. Inside my bag, the recorder light blinked, proof, truth, power, all in one small pulse. Tomorrow, Daniel would begin to panic. And panic, I knew, was the beginning of collapse. The morning after the hearing felt strangely still. The air carried that eerie calm that always comes before a storm, as if the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. My body was exhausted, but my mind felt razor-sharp. I sat in the kitchen, coffee cooling untouched, newspaper spread open on the table. There it was, front page, second column. Court freezes Carter estate amid forgery allegations, family rift deepens. Below it, my name. My son's. My ex-husband's. 3 names tangled together like a rope soaked in oil, waiting for a spark. The article quoted unnamed sources describing me as withdrawn, unstable, emotionally volatile. I could practically hear Daniel's voice feeding those words to the reporter. I smiled. He was trying to control the story the same way he always controlled everything, through perception. But perception had turned on him now. At 9 a.m., Harris called. The press coverage is working in our favor, he said. Public sympathy is shifting. The leaked evidence recordings have gone viral. They can't suppress it anymore. Good, I said. Let them choke on their own lies. Daniel's team will retaliate, he warned. They always do when cornered. Expect more manipulation, maybe public statements, maybe something uglier. But remember, we own the truth now. Stay quiet, stay strategic. Don't worry, I replied. I'm not the same woman they once silenced. After we hung up, I stood by the window, staring at the clouds rolling over the horizon. The neighborhood looked deceptively peaceful, children biking, a dog barking in the distance, but beneath it all, I could feel the shift. My name was no longer whispered with pity. It was spoken with awe. Around noon, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Matthew stood there. Alone. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair unkempt. The expensive suit he'd worn to court looked slept in. He held his phone loosely in one hand, a folded paper in the other. Mom, he said quietly. Can I come in? I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. You already know where everything is. He walked in slowly, like someone entering a graveyard. The silence between us was thick, fragile. "I read the papers," he said. "They're destroying us." "They're destroying him," I corrected. "You still have a choice." He looked at me sharply. "You think it's that simple?" "He's my father." I met his gaze evenly. "And I'm your mother." Something flickered behind his eyes, guilt, maybe shame, but he pushed it down. "You humiliated us. You could have kept this private." "Private?" I laughed bitterly. "Like how you privately forged my name? Privately planned to have me declared insane? Don't talk to me about privacy, Matthew." He flinched, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who hid behind my legs during thunderstorms. "I didn't know how far he'd go," he whispered. "I just wanted him to stop yelling. He said if I helped him, he'd pay off my debts." "Debt doesn't buy forgiveness," I said softly. "And silence doesn't erase guilt." He handed me the folded paper. "This came this morning. Dad wants me to sign it before the verdict." I opened it. A formal statement, pre-written, typed neatly. It declared that all actions taken against me were under Matthew's direction alone, absolving Daniel of responsibility. A sacrifice. A son offered to protect the father. My chest tightened. "He wants to make you his scapegoat." "I know," he said bitterly. "But if I don't sign, he'll destroy me." "Matthew," I said quietly, "he already has." He sank into a chair, face in his hands. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "I believe that," I said, sitting across from him. "But belief doesn't undo what's been done. You have one chance to make this right." He looked up, eyes red. "How?" "Testify," I said. "Tell the court everything. Every word, every plan, every lie." He shook his head. "He'll kill me." I leaned forward. "No, he won't. Because by the time he tries, he'll have nothing left to fight with." He looked at me for a long time. Then something shifted, his shoulders sagged, his jaw loosened. "You really think the truth can fix this?" I smiled faintly. "No. But it can end it." He exhaled, long and shaky. "You're not the same anymore." "I know." He stood, glancing around the room one last time, as if seeing it for the first time. "I'll call Harris. I'll do it." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Mom," he said softly, "for what it's worth." "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I just watched him walk away into the gray morning. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like the end of a chapter. 2 hours later, the chaos began. My phone buzzed, Harris's number flashing urgently. I answered. "What happened?" "Daniel just held a press conference," he said, voice tight. "He's accusing you of elder abuse, saying you manipulated your son and forged evidence against him. He claims you're orchestrating the case to gain full control of the family assets." I almost laughed. So the abuser calls himself the victim. Predictable. "Don't respond publicly," Harris said firmly. "We'll handle this legally. Let him drown in his own noise." But deep down, I knew this was Daniel's last card, public sympathy. He'd spent his life controlling the narrative. Now that it was slipping, he'd twisted until even lies looked holy. By evening, social media exploded, headlines, gossip threads, online debates. Some defended me. Others parroted his lies. But for once, I didn't care. Because beneath all the noise, the truth was quietly, methodically working its way through the cracks. That night, I sat in the dark living room, listening to the rain start again. My phone buzzed once more, an unknown number. I answered. Silence. Then Daniel's voice, low and venomous. "You think this is over, Elena? You've embarrassed me publicly. You've turned my son against me. But this isn't the end. You don't know how many people owe me favors." I pressed record. Then call in your favors, I said softly. Because soon, you'll need them for bail. He laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. You were always good at pretending to be strong. But you're still just the woman I made you. I smiled into the phone. No, Daniel. You're the man I unmade. The line went dead. I saved the recording. Another brick. Another nail in his coffin. When I finally went to bed, thunder rumbled again, distant but growing closer. I thought of Matthew's trembling voice, Emily's fear, my father's last words. Don't warn them. Let the truth do the work. Tomorrow, the truth would. The next day began with the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels loaded. I could sense it before I even opened my eyes, a heaviness in the air, a stillness that hinted something was about to give way. By 8 a.m., Harris had already called. Elena, he said, voice clipped, urgent. It's happening. Daniel's losing control. He just tried to withdraw money from one of the frozen accounts. The bank flagged it and notified the court. We have everything logged. I sat up slowly. Then it's starting, I said. Yes, he replied. The judge scheduled an emergency review. We're expected at noon. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the mirror again, the same blue dress, pressed and clean from the hearing. But this time I added my father's pendant and a pair of dark pearl earrings. They had been my mother's once, a rare softness from her I still couldn't forget. A reminder that even cruelty leaves something behind. When I arrived at the courthouse, there were even more cameras, more whispers. Reporters leaned over barricades shouting questions. Mrs. Carter, is it true your husband falsified your medical records? Do you plan to press criminal charges? Is it true your son's cooperating with investigators? That last question made me stop. Harris had said nothing yet, but the tone told me everything. I wasn't the only one setting traps anymore. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller today, more suffocating. Daniel sat at the defense table, eyes sunken, his arrogance replaced with something uglier, panic. His lawyer's tie was crooked, his papers disordered. Matthew sat separately this time on the witness bench, avoiding his father's glare. When the judge entered, the murmur died instantly. Proceed, she said. Harris stood. Your Honor, we have new evidence submitted by the plaintiff's side and verified by both law enforcement and the Financial Commission. The defendant, Mr. Daniel Carter, attempted to move restricted funds out of the Carter estate accounts last night, in direct violation of the court's freeze order. The judge's expression hardened. Is this true, Mr. Carter? Daniel rose, sweating under the lights. Your Honor, there's been a misunderstanding. Harris interrupted smoothly. There's also video surveillance of him entering the bank's private office at 10:43 p.m., accompanied by a man identified as his business associate, Mr. Alfred Crane, currently under investigation for tax fraud. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's lawyer paled. Objection, irrelevant character association. Overruled, the judge said sharply. Continue, Mr. Harris. He clicked his remote. The screen on the wall flickered to life. A security video played, grainy but clear. Daniel, unmistakable, signing papers, exchanging envelopes, shaking hands with a nervous-looking banker. Then, Harris played the audio file I'd recorded the night before. Daniel, you think this is over, Elena? You've embarrassed me publicly. You've turned my son against me. But this isn't the end. You don't know how many people owe me favors. Elena, then call in your favors. Because soon, you'll need them for bail. My voice echoed through the room. It felt surreal hearing it played back, stripped of fear, filled only with finality. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Carter, this call took place last night? Daniel's lips pressed into a line. Your Honor, this woman, she's setting me up. She's manipulating everyone. Enough, the judge said, her voice slicing the air. You've manipulated this court, your wife, your son, and your financial institutions. Do not insult our intelligence further. Daniel's hands trembled. You can't prove. Harris held up a document. We can. And we have. Exhibit 22, verified transfer attempt, signed under his name. Matthew spoke suddenly, voice breaking the tension like a gunshot. It's true. Every head turned toward him. He stood, shaking but resolute. I was there. I tried to stop him. He said if I didn't help, he'd cut me off completely. He forged Mom's medical papers. He used my name for the wire transfers. I'm done lying. The room erupted. Daniel's lawyer tried to pull him down, but Matthew didn't sit. He turned to his father. You taught me to lie for you. To smile for you. But you never taught me how to live with myself after. I can't keep carrying your sins. Daniel's face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little. Mr. Carter, the judge snapped. Another outburst and you'll be removed from this courtroom. Harris nodded at me subtly. I understood. The trap was closing. Your Honor, he said, with the court's permission, my client would like to submit one final recording. It's the voice of the late Mr. Richard Vale, Elena Carter's father, regarding the trust's intent. The room fell silent again. Harris pressed play. My father's voice, faint but firm. If they ever come for her, remember this, the estate belongs to Elena Vale Carter and to no other. Any attempt to deceive her or exploit her will constitute fraud under my will and the law. My daughter has earned every brick of this fortune. It was like hearing his ghost rise to speak. I looked down, eyes blurring, but I didn't cry. Not this time. The judge nodded slowly. The late Mr. Vale's statement has full legal authority. His will, combined with current evidence, makes ownership indisputable. She turned to Daniel. This court finds you in direct violation of trust law, forgery statutes, and willful fraud. Your accounts will remain frozen until a criminal trial is scheduled. Daniel's face drained of color. Criminal trial, he repeated. Yes, Mr. Carter, the judge said coolly. You've crossed beyond civil dispute. The gavel came down once, echoing through the room like thunder. Matthew sank into his seat, hands over his face. Daniel stared straight ahead, hollow. The fight had drained out of him. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. The judge stood and left, her robe swaying like the end of a storm. Harris placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. It's over, Elena. But it wasn't. Not yet. As I stood, Daniel's voice rasped behind me. You think you've won? I turned. I didn't win. I survived. You're the one who lost. He sneered. Enjoy your money. You'll die alone in that big, empty house. I smiled faintly. Better alone than living with monsters. He looked ready to speak again, but the bailiff's hand landed firmly on his arm. They led him away as flashes burst like fireworks behind us. Outside, the air was crisp, the sunlight bright enough to make me squint. Reporters swarmed again, but Harris waved them off. I stepped onto the courthouse steps and paused, looking up at the sky. For the first time in years, it felt open. Matthew lingered at the doors. Mom, he said softly. I turned. I meant what I said, he continued. I'll testify again in the criminal case. I'll tell everything. Good, I said. Then, after a pause, you're still my son, Matthew. But now you have to become your own man. He nodded, tears brimming, and walked away. Harris approached. You handled that with grace. I looked out at the crowd, the courthouse, the chaos. Grace is just power without noise, I said. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt powerful. The storm had passed, but I knew the aftermath was just beginning. When I woke the next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains like liquid gold. For a few precious seconds, I forgot everything, the trial, the betrayal, the whispers. I just listened to the quiet. No knocks. No shouting. No threats. Then the phone rang. It wasn't Harris this time. It was a number I didn't recognize, but my instincts had sharpened. I answered anyway. "Mrs. Carter?" a calm voice asked. "This is Detective Ross from the County Financial Crimes Unit. We've just been assigned to investigate Mr. Daniel Carter's case. Your lawyer has authorized us to contact you." I sat up straighter. "You've started the investigation already?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We executed a warrant early this morning. Your ex-husband's offices and accounts have been seized. We'll need you to confirm a few details about the forged documents." I felt the corners of my lips lift. Of course. After I hung up, I set the phone down slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. The law was no longer chasing me, it was chasing him. The wheel had turned. I brewed coffee, took it to the porch, and sat looking out at the street. The morning light glinted off the mailbox. For the first time in months, the air didn't smell like fear. Around 10, Harris arrived. He didn't knock, he just walked in, the way he always did when something important had happened. His tie was loose, his expression calm but charged. "It's official," he said. "They're filing criminal charges. Forgery, coercion, and attempted fraud. It's over for him." I stared at him, the words taking a moment to land. "Over?" He nodded. "For now, yes. But we should expect retaliation, statements, appeals. Men like Daniel don't vanish quietly. They'll try to rewrite their downfall. Then we'll keep writing the truth louder," I said. He smiled faintly. "You're learning fast." "I had good teachers," I replied, glancing toward the heavens where my father's voice still lingered in memory. Harris handed me a document. "The trust has officially transferred all holdings to your name. Property titles, shares, dividends. You're now the majority shareholder of Westvale Holdings, and the sole beneficiary of the Vale estate." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even triumph. It was disbelief, how something that had been stolen from me for decades had quietly, irrevocably come home. I looked down at the papers, my name stamped in thick black ink. Elena Vale Carter. I traced the letters with my fingertip. For the first time, my name felt whole. "What will you do now?" Harris asked softly. I looked up. "Rebuild." He nodded. "Then we start by securing everything. I'll assign accountants, trustees, security. The media will try to sensationalize this, but you can choose what part of the story belongs to you." "Only the truth," I said. "The rest can rot." When he left, I sat in the stillness again, surrounded by silence that felt almost holy. But peace is rarely permanent. By afternoon, the apologies began. First, a knock on the door. My cousin Claire stood there with a bouquet of lilies and a nervous smile. "Elena," she began, voice syrupy, "I came as soon as I heard. You must be relieved. We always knew you were right." I almost laughed. "We knew?" No one had stood beside me when the world called me crazy. I took the flowers politely, placed them on the counter, and looked at her. "Relief isn't the word," I said. "It's something colder." Her smile faltered. "You're not going to hold grudges, are you?" "Family should have stood up when it mattered," I finished for her. She flushed, muttered an excuse, and left quickly. After she was gone, I stared at the lilies. They were beautiful, but their scent was suffocating. I threw them into the trash. By evening, more messages poured in, old friends, estranged relatives, even church members who'd once avoided me. "So proud of you. We always believed in you. You're an inspiration." They believed now because the world did. That night, as I walked through the house, I found myself standing in front of the old family photographs. Daniel smiling. Matthew as a child. Myself between them, small, ghost-like. I touched the glass and whispered, "You'll never have this version of me again." The next morning, Harris called again. His voice was calm but careful. Elena, I think you should prepare yourself. The news about Daniel's arrest went public last night. The fallout is intense. What kind of intense? He's been removed from 3 corporate boards. His business associates are abandoning him. There's talk of bankruptcy. And his lawyer, he resigned. Good, I said simply. But Harris hesitated. There's something else. Emily's gone missing. The words froze me. Missing? She didn't show up for her police statement this morning. Her phone's off. The police are checking her last known location. I gripped the edge of the table. He's retaliating. Possibly. But she's smart. She may have gone into hiding until the warrant's served. My pulse hammered. She helped me. She doesn't deserve this. I know, Harris said quietly. And we'll find her. For now, stay where you are. We have security monitoring your property. You're safe, Elena. Safe. The word felt fragile, almost meaningless. That evening, the doorbell rang again. I checked the camera. Matthew stood outside, drenched from rain, his face pale. I opened the door just enough to see his eyes. She's gone, he said. Emily? He nodded. Dad's people took her. He's desperate. He knows prison is coming, and he's blaming everyone, especially her. I felt the air leave my lungs. Have you told the police? I did. They said they're looking, but you know how Dad works, money, favors, shadows. I stepped aside and let him in. He looked wrecked. His hands shook as he ran them through his hair. He called me from a restricted number. Said if I testify again, I'll end up like her. I stared at him, my mind racing. Then we record every threat. Every call. He's burying himself deeper. Matthew dropped into a chair. I don't know how to live with this, Mom. You do it one truth at a time, I said. The same way I did. He looked up, tears spilling freely. You shouldn't have had to go through all this because of me. I knelt beside him, placing my hand over his. You were taught to love the wrong kind of power. Now you have the chance to unlearn it. He nodded, breathing shakily. When he left, the house felt heavier. I stood at the window long after his car disappeared, the rain blurring everything into silver streaks. Then my phone buzzed, a single text from an unknown number. Tell Harris to stop digging. You don't know what's coming. No name. No punctuation. I stared at it for a long time, my hand trembling, not from fear this time, but from fury. I typed back 2 words. Try me. Then I blocked the number and placed my phone face down. Outside, thunder rumbled again. I didn't flinch. The villains were beginning to collapse, just as Harris predicted. They had built their empire on fear, and I was finally teaching them what it felt like to live without it. The next 48 hours unfolded like the end of a long, poisonous dream. Every channel on television carried Daniel's face, sometimes grainy footage of him leaving court, sometimes the glossy studio photo from his company's press kit. Each time, a new caption appeared beneath it. Businessman accused of defrauding ex-wife. Family empire crumbles under inheritance scandal. Carter case, new evidence suggests criminal conspiracy. It was everywhere. I watched for a few minutes, then turned the volume down. The noise wasn't my enemy anymore. It was his. That afternoon, Harris called again. They've located Emily, he said, his voice steadier now. She's safe. The police found her at a motel outside town. She'll testify tomorrow. I exhaled slowly, the tension sliding off my shoulders like a heavy coat. Is she hurt? Shaken, but unharmed. She's cooperating fully. Her testimony will seal this. Good, I said. Let's end it. But ending a war never feels clean. That night, the memories returned, not in dreams, but in flashes that cut through the dark, the wedding gate, Matthew's cold eyes, Daniel's smirk, the forged signature. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the scars inside me pulse like quiet warnings. Freedom never comes without ghosts. At dawn, a text arrived from Matthew. He's calling again. Threatening everyone. I'll record everything like you said. I typed back. Good. You're learning to fight the right way now. By noon, Harris arrived to drive me to the station. The police wanted final confirmation of the forged documents. His car smelled faintly of leather and rain. Once Emily gives her statement, he said, the prosecution will have enough to proceed. Daniel won't be able to buy his way out. I nodded. He never understood, money can't silence memory. At the precinct, the detective greeted us with the polite neutrality of someone balancing justice with procedure. We've verified the handwriting analysis, he said. The forgeries were done by a private firm in another city, paid in cash. We've traced the payments back to one of Mr. Carter's shell companies. He slid a folder across the table. Sign here to confirm ownership of the originals. My hand didn't shake as I signed. My name looked strong, final. Elena Vale Carter. When we left the station, reporters waited outside again. Cameras flashed, voices hurled questions. Harris blocked most of them, but one caught my ear. Mrs. Carter, is it true your husband's bail was denied? I stopped mid-step. Denied? I turned to Harris. He nodded. He's in custody. He tried to contact a judge privately last night, obstruction of justice. The court revoked bail. A breath I didn't know I'd been holding escaped me. Then it's really happening. Yes, he said softly. He's finally where he belongs. That evening, the storm came back with a vengeance, rain pounding against the windows, lightning splitting the sky like a camera flash from heaven itself. I sat by the fireplace, papers spread across the table, finalizing every file Harris had asked for. My life, catalogued. My pain, notarized. The phone buzzed again. A voicemail. I pressed play. Mom, it's me. Matthew's voice was small, almost childlike. He called from the jail. He's blaming me for everything. Said I betrayed him worse than you ever did. I don't know what to feel. I thought I'd feel free, but I just feel empty. I listened in silence. I know I can't undo what I did. But I wanted you to know I told them everything. Every detail. He won't hurt you again. I promise. The message ended with a quiet sob and the click of the phone being set down. I replayed it once more, then saved it. Another truth preserved. The next morning, the headlines were merciless. Carter family scandal deepens, son testifies against father. The same people who once called me bitter now called me brave. But there's no satisfaction in vindication when it comes too late to heal what's broken. Still, I dressed carefully that day, soft gray suit, hair pinned back. I wasn't celebrating. I was testifying. The courtroom was half full, the tension thicker than before. This wasn't a civil hearing anymore, this was a criminal trial pre-hearing. Daniel sat in a glass-walled booth, guarded, his hands cuffed. He looked smaller, older, his skin pale under the fluorescent lights. His eyes searched the room until they found me. I met them, unblinking. When the judge entered, the air seemed to tighten. This is a preliminary session, she said, to determine whether the charges proceed to full trial. The prosecutor presented first, a meticulous narrative of deceit, evidence, and motive. Each time Daniel's name was spoken, I could see him flinch. The once untouchable man reduced to a collection of crimes on paper. Then they called Emily to the stand. She walked in wearing a plain coat, her face pale but resolute. Her voice trembled only at first. She described the night Daniel forged the papers, how he'd bragged about ending the problem permanently. She played the recordings she'd hidden on her phone, the ones Harris had verified. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, to twist her words, but Emily didn't waver. She kept her eyes fixed on the judge. I was afraid, she said, voice breaking. He said he'd ruin us all if we ever spoke. But Mrs. Carter saved me by fighting him. She showed me you can survive him. For the first time I looked at Emily not as an enemy, but as another woman clawing her way out of the same dark pit. I nodded to her when she stepped down. She nodded back, eyes wet. Then it was my turn. The prosecutor called my name, and I walked to the stand slowly, the sound of my heels echoing across the room. I took the oath, my palm steady against the Bible. Mrs. Carter, the prosecutor said gently, did you ever imagine you'd be here today? No, I said. But I always knew I'd end up fighting alone. What was your first thought when you learned your husband had forged your signature? That it wasn't the first time he'd stolen something from me. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. And what about your son? I hesitated, then spoke the truth. He lost himself trying to please a man who never loved him. But I believe he's finding his way back. Daniel's lawyer smirked. So this is about redemption now? I met his gaze coolly. No. It's about ownership of my life, my name, and my truth. The judge banged her gavel once. Enough crosstalk. Proceed. The questioning lasted hours, but I answered each one calmly, clearly, without trembling. The years of silence had made my voice stronger, not weaker. Every time Daniel tried to interrupt, the bailiff warned him. By the time it ended, the room felt different, lighter somehow, as if the ghosts were finally leaving. When the judge adjourned, Daniel called out, Elena. I turned. You think this makes you righteous? He hissed. You're just as broken as I made you. I walked toward him until only the glass separated us. My reflection overlapped his, two versions of the same past, staring each other down. No, I said quietly. You didn't make me. You just exposed what I was forced to become. He slammed his fist against the glass, but the guards pulled him back. I didn't flinch. Outside, the courthouse steps were packed again. The rain had stopped, the air sharp with cold. Matthew waited at the bottom, hands in his pockets. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but his eyes were red. Mom, he said softly, it's over. I shook my head. No, Matthew. It's just beginning. He frowned. What do you mean? I looked past him at the cameras, the people, the world watching. You can end a trial. But you can't end a story until the truth finishes telling itself. He didn't understand yet, but he would. That night, when I returned home, I stood in the doorway for a long time before entering. The house was the same, yet everything inside it had changed. Every wall, every window, every breath of air carried something I had reclaimed. I walked to the mirror again, touched the pendant at my neck, and whispered, it's almost done, Father. Outside, the last echo of thunder faded into quiet. Tomorrow, the final verdict would come. And with it, the collapse. The day of the verdict began under a pale, wintry sun. The air had that strange stillness that comes before a reckoning. I woke early, long before the alarm, long before the city stirred, and sat at the edge of my bed in silence. I didn't pray. I didn't pace. I just breathed. For the first time in years, breathing didn't feel like work. The house was spotless, every paper filed, every photograph dusted, every reminder of what I had survived now lined up in quiet order. My briefcase waited by the door. Inside, every recording, every signature, every truth I'd carried like a weapon. When I arrived at the courthouse, the crowd was larger than ever. Reporters, camera crews, even strangers clutching newspapers. The headline running on every screen. Carter versus Carter, final verdict expected today. Inside, the courtroom was tense enough to hum. Emily sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly together. Matthew sat farther back, flanked by two officers for protection. He didn't look at me at first, but when he did, his eyes held something I hadn't seen in years, peace, fragile but real. Daniel sat behind glass again, flanked by guards. His once immaculate hair hung limp over his forehead. His suit, wrinkled. His cufflinks gone. He looked nothing like the man who once dominated every room he entered. He looked human. And it terrified him. When the judge entered, we all rose. The gavel struck once. Be seated. She began to read the ruling slowly, her voice deliberate, each word a hammer against the years of deception. The court finds, beyond reasonable doubt, that Mr. Daniel Carter knowingly and willfully engaged in the forgery of legal documents with the intent to defraud Mrs. Elena Vale Carter of her rightful inheritance under the Vale Trust. Each phrase landed like a heartbeat. Furthermore, the court recognizes the coercion and manipulation directed toward both Mrs. Carter and her son, Matthew Carter. The evidence presented establishes a clear pattern of financial, emotional, and psychological abuse. Daniel's lawyer rose halfway, muttering, but the judge silenced him with a look. The court therefore rules, all assets and properties within the Vale Trust shall remain under Mrs. Carter's sole and protected ownership. The defendant, Mr. Daniel Carter, is hereby convicted of fraud, falsification of legal documents, and obstruction of justice. Sentencing is set for 30 days from today's date. A collective breath escaped the room. It was over. Truly, finally, over. Daniel's head dropped into his hands. The guards reached for him, but he didn't resist. Matthew exhaled sharply behind me, his body folding forward as if the weight of his life had just been lifted. Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, sobbing quietly. I sat perfectly still. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let the silence stretch. The judge looked directly at me. Mrs. Carter, she said, the court commends your courage. You may have been the victim of deceit, but your resilience has ensured justice not only for yourself, but for those who could not speak. I nodded once. My voice came out low but steady. Thank you, Your Honor. As the gavel came down one last time, the courtroom erupted, reporters whispering, papers shuffling, the metallic clink of handcuffs as Daniel was led away. He turned once at the door. Our eyes met across the chaos. There was no hatred left in me. Only distance. He mouthed something, you'll regret this. I almost laughed. The old threat had lost its power. I already did, I whispered back. Now it's your turn. When he was gone, the sound that followed wasn't applause or noise, it was relief. The kind that runs deep, almost holy. Outside, the sky had shifted. The sun cut through the gray clouds, lighting the courthouse steps like a stage. Cameras flashed, microphones reached forward, questions fired like bullets. Mrs. Carter. How does it feel to win? Do you plan to rebuild the family company? Will you forgive your son? I stopped halfway down the steps and looked out at the swarm. How does it feel? I repeated. It feels like breathing after years underwater. And I walked straight through the flashing lights. That evening, Harris and I sat in my living room. The storm had cleared, the moon shining through the window. He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one. You did it, he said quietly. We did it, I corrected. He smiled. You know, your father would have been proud. I looked down at my glass, watching the reflection tremble with the light. He saw it coming. He built the shield I didn't know I had. I just learned how to lift it. Harris raised his glass. To shields. To survival, I said. We clinked glasses softly, and for a moment, silence settled comfortably between us. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small envelope. This arrived today, addressed to you. It's from the court archives. Apparently, your father left a sealed letter marked for delivery upon conclusion of any legal dispute regarding his estate. My hands trembled as I took it. The handwriting was unmistakable, his sharp, deliberate strokes. I broke the seal and unfolded the paper. My dearest Elena. I knew the world would one day ask you to prove what you already are, worthy. I could not protect you from their cruelty, but I could leave you the means to rise above it. If you're reading this, it means you have done what even I could not, you have faced them and remained whole. Remember this, power is not in possession. It's in peace. Guard both fiercely. Your father. The paper blurred as tears filled my eyes, not of grief, but of release. For years, I had carried pain like inheritance. Now I understood, it was never my burden. It was my crucible. Harris stood to leave, pausing by the door. You know, Elena, he said, people will write about this for years. I smiled faintly. Let them. Just make sure they spell my name right this time. When he left, I walked through the house one last time. The rooms that had once echoed with silence now felt alive. I stopped by the window overlooking the garden, my father's old rose bushes still standing, stubborn as ever. Matthew arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hands in his pockets. I didn't think you'd want to see me, he said quietly. I didn't think you'd come. He looked down. I had to. I needed to say it face to face. I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. I studied him for a long moment. You can't undo the past, Matthew. But you can live differently. I want to, he said. I will. Then start by forgiving yourself, I said softly. I already have. He swallowed hard. Do you mean that? Yes. Because holding on to hate means carrying pieces of him. And I'm done carrying anything that belongs to him. He nodded, eyes wet, and for the first time since he was a boy, he reached out and hugged me. His shoulders shook against mine, and I realized he wasn't the golden child anymore. He was just my son again. When he left, the night had deepened. I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was crisp, clean. Somewhere far away, I could hear the faint sound of sirens, the world still turning, still punishing its monsters. I tilted my face toward the sky. The stars were faint but visible. I whispered, not to anyone living, but to the echoes of every moment that had broken me. I survived you. And in the quiet that followed, I felt it, the full collapse of the villains, and the steady, unshakable rise of myself. It took months for the noise to fade. The courtrooms emptied. The reporters found new scandals. The newspapers stopped calling my name. But inside me, something still trembled, like the air right after thunder. Freedom doesn't arrive like a sunrise. It comes in fragments, one morning when you realize you're not checking over your shoulder, one night when silence feels like safety instead of exile. That's how it began for me. I spent the first few weeks rebuilding what Daniel had torn apart, not the house, not the finances, but myself. I started small, cooking breakfast again, repainting the kitchen walls, playing the old records my father used to hum to. Ordinary things. Human things. The legal world still buzzed, of course. Daniel's name filled headlines every few days, fraud, perjury, frozen assets. His sentencing was scheduled for spring. He'd already lost everything but his bitterness, and bitterness doesn't spend well in prison. Matthew had moved into a small apartment downtown, away from the chaos. He texted me every few days. Therapy's helping, he wrote once. I'm working, paying my own bills. No more lies. I didn't need promises. Effort was enough. Emily called once a week. Her voice grew stronger with each conversation. I filed for divorce, she told me one evening. I finally signed the papers. Good, I said. Freedom looks good on you. She laughed softly. You taught me that. And maybe that was the strangest part, how pain, once weaponized, had turned into something that connected us. A quiet sisterhood of survivors, bound not by blood, but by shared ghosts. In late April, the sentencing finally came. I didn't want to go. I'd seen enough of cold courtrooms and fluorescent lights. But Harris insisted. You deserve to hear it, he said. Closure isn't given, it's witnessed. So I went. The courthouse felt smaller now. No cameras, no crowd. Just a handful of reporters, a few police officers, and the sound of shuffling paper. Daniel was broad and wearing prison gray. He looked thinner, his arrogance stripped bare. When he saw me, he smirked faintly, as if to pretend the world hadn't turned on him. But his eyes betrayed him, tired, cornered, haunted. The judge spoke briskly, her tone clinical. "Mr. Daniel Carter, this court sentences you to 12 years in state prison for fraud, document falsification, and obstruction of justice." 12 years. He exhaled, a sound half laugh, half disbelief. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing is executed?" the judge asked. Daniel turned his head toward me. "Yes." His voice cracked. "I spent my life building something out of nothing. I gave her everything, houses, comfort, a name, and she destroyed it because she wanted more." I stood, slowly, the courtroom holding its breath. "No," I said. "You destroyed it because you wanted everything. Even me." For a second, our eyes met, the woman he tried to erase, and the man who failed to. The gavel struck once. Sentence confirmed. As the guards led him away, Daniel turned back one last time. "You think this makes you better than me?" I met his gaze. "No. Just freer." He said nothing else. When the doors closed behind him, I felt it, finality. Not triumph, not joy. Just quiet. Harris touched my arm gently. "It's done now." "Yes," I said. "It's done." But even as I said it, I knew endings are only illusions. Healing isn't a line, it's a loop that keeps folding back until the pain learns to breathe differently. In May, I began writing again. Not a book, not a statement, just letters to myself. Letters I would never send. "Dear Elena," I wrote one night, "you didn't win by defeating them. You won by staying human in a house that tried to turn you into a ghost." Another letter said, "They called you bitter. But bitterness is just grief refusing to die quietly." Sometimes I burned the letters afterward. Sometimes I kept them in a drawer. It didn't matter. They were pieces of me I had finally learned to talk to. Harris still called occasionally. "You could sell your shares in Westvale Holdings," he suggested once. "You'd make millions." "I don't want millions," I said. "I want peace." He chuckled. "Peace doesn't pay dividends." "It pays in silence," I replied. "And that's enough." I donated a portion of my inheritance to women's legal aid, funds for those whose voices were still trapped in someone else's control. I didn't do it for charity. I did it because I remembered the feeling of being alone in a room full of people who wanted me erased. By summer, the house felt alive again. The garden bloomed wildly, roses spilling over the old fence my father had built. One evening, Matthew came to visit, his hands covered in oil stains. "I'm fixing cars now," he said shyly. "It's not glamorous, but it's honest." "Honesty suits you," I said. We walked through the garden together, quiet at first. Then he stopped and asked, "Do you ever regret it? The fight? The court?" I looked up at the fading sky. "Regret? No. But sometimes I wish I hadn't had to be so strong." He nodded. "Me too." When he left, I stood alone by the roses, the scent thick in the warm air. I thought of every woman who had ever been told to stay silent for the sake of peace. Every daughter taught to swallow her anger because it wasn't ladylike. Every mother blamed for loving too loudly or not enough. I whispered to them, to all of us, "We're done apologizing." By autumn, the news of Daniel faded into footnotes. A line here, a passing mention there. Former businessman serving sentence. No one cared anymore. The world had moved on. But I hadn't forgotten. Not out of obsession, but out of gratitude. His cruelty had forced me to meet myself, to look directly into my own pain and name it without shame. Sometimes, late at night, I'd still hear echoes, the wedding hall, the laughter, the rejection. The moment my own son said, "She said no." But those words didn't break me anymore. They reminded me of the line between love and ownership, between family and captivity. I had learned the cost of truth, and I had paid it willingly. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the garden, covering the roses in a quiet white shroud. I sat by the window with a blanket and tea, watching the world go still again. A letter arrived in the mail, official, embossed with the court's seal. Inside was a copy of the final order, the Vale Trust to remain under the sole ownership of Mrs. Elena Vale Carter in perpetuity. Below it, a note in Harris's handwriting, "It's finally yours. Completely. No shadows left." I traced the embossed seal, the weight of it grounding me. My father's signature still visible beneath. His voice echoed faintly in my mind. Power is not in possession. It's in peace. I smiled softly. I finally understand, I whispered. The snow fell heavier outside, blanketing everything, the house, the street, the past. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and for the first time in decades, I slept deeply. When spring came again, the roses returned. Their color was deeper now, red like memory, bright like survival. I tended to them every morning, pruning gently, humming under my breath. One afternoon, Emily visited. She looked different, lighter, freer. "I got a job," she said. "At a nonprofit. Helping women in custody cases." I smiled. "That suits you." She looked around the garden. "It's beautiful here. Peaceful." "It wasn't always," I said. She nodded slowly. Neither was I. We sat together for a while, the air filled with bees and distant birds. "You know," she said, "he used to say you were weak." I was, I admitted. Until he taught me not to be. She laughed softly. "You turned your wounds into blueprints." "Maybe that's what survival is," I said. "Learning to build from what tried to bury you." That night, I wrote one final letter. "Dear Elena. You've walked through fire and come out holding water. You've learned that forgiveness isn't surrender, it's closure. You've learned that revenge isn't about hurting them back, it's about never letting them hurt you again. You are no longer the woman they disowned, the wife they betrayed, the mother they blamed. You are your own inheritance now." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same tin box that once held my father's tapes. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. The war was over. And in its quiet aftermath, I realized something I hadn't before. Victory doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sighs. Sometimes it just breathes. Months later, I stood on my porch at dawn, the horizon painted gold. The world was quiet again, no reporters, no lawyers, no ghosts. Just the hum of life returning, slow but sure. The house behind me no longer felt like a battlefield. It was a sanctuary. Every wall that once heard my silence now echoed with peace. Daniel was gone. Matthew was healing. Emily had begun again. And me, I was no longer surviving. I was living. My father's words lived with me still, power is not in possession. It's in peace. He was right. Power isn't inherited, it's reclaimed. One truth at a time. I looked toward the roses blooming beneath the sunlight and whispered, "I am my own inheritance now." And in that silence, I finally felt free. Did this story reach you? What part stayed with you most? If you'd like more stories like this, subscribe and share your thoughts below.